Is this filter really as good as they claim? An H-alpha 03 filter going for $140 for the 1¼ inch version and $290 for the 2-inch version, and they're on sale right now for Black Friday. We're going to run some tests and find out, and I'll eventually be giving away the filter to one of you. Welcome to Deep Sky Detail. I've got some cool stuff lined up for this video, including signal-to-noise ratio analyses, looking at stacked images over 3 targets totaling over 15 hours of data, and simulations to test the accuracy of some of SVBONY's claims. I recently purchased, with channel funds, the SV220 5nm SHO filter set to compare against my Optolong 12nm SHO filter set. In general, I've been testing a lot of filters lately, so I have about 15 hours with each of my HA and O3 filters to compare against. Normally, I don't do unpaid review, but SVBONY did reach out and asked if I would review their dual narrowband filter. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I should, but I reached out to my members on Buy Me a Coffee and YouTube and polled them on whether I should review it. I didn't receive a single no response. Everyone said yes. So I told SVBONY I'd be willing to review it as long as I could say whatever I wanted to about the filter. There are biases that can creep in with doing unpaid reviews for companies like this video. And so throughout the video, I'll remind you of it and help keep me honest and you aware. Some biases I can help mitigate, others I can't. Also, I have purposely not seen any other reviews about this filter to make sure this review is as based on my own thoughts as possible. A link to the filter that you can purchase on Amazon is in the pinned comment. There seem to be several different types of SV220 filters on SVBONY's website. From what I can tell, there are other filters with the same name on the website but have larger bandwidths, so be careful. One thing I would recommend SVBONY with is to have more intuitive names for their filters and maybe put the bandwidth of the filters in the filter name somehow. The one I'm examining in this video is the 3nm mounted 1¼ inch version. It claims to have a 3nm bandwidth plus or minus 1nm. And SVBONY claims that it has an optical density of 5, which is a measure of the amount of unwanted light that it transmits outside of the bandwidth region. 5 is actually very good, although the optical density is really hard for me to verify in this review, and the transmission curve that was provided with the filter makes it hard for me to verify a lot of the information. It would be nice to have something more detailed. Having said that, for a 3nm bandwidth filter, it seems like a steal and on par with more expensive filters. Right now for Black Friday, the 2-inch version is $246 US, while the 1¼ version is going for around $120 US. In my experience, those are really good prices. So let's get this in my filter wheel and start imaging. For this review, I'm using my f7.5 Orion ED doublet with a 0.x reducer for an effective ratio of f6. All images were taken on my Orion Sirius mount guided with an off-axis guider. I'm using a 294mm Pro camera. Note that this is the mono version. You probably will use a dual band filter like this with color cameras, but I think a mono camera is better for actually testing the signal and noise characteristics of the filter. And if you do a lot of HOO mono imaging, there might be a good argument for using this filter like a luminance filter on targets that have both HA and O3 data, and then using your single bandwidth filters for color. It's just an idea. I'll provide color images that show roughly what you can expect with a one-shot color camera too, so you can get a feel for what the filter can do. I am in a Bortle 6 or 7 zone, so there is a significant amount of light pollution, but not as bad as you would get in the middle of a city. One of the biases that can creep in is a lack of objectivity in unpaid reviews. A YouTuber is given a product and that unconsciously influences how they think about the product. To help mitigate this, I've decided to do some simulations to help give more objective predictions about how the filter should perform. In other words, how much light pollution do we expect the filter to block? So To start out, filters aren't perfect, and one way to help determine how imperfect they are is through their bandwidth, measured in the full width half maximum, or the FWHM. The larger the FWHM, the more light pollution gets let in. As I mentioned in my previous video, I've been working with another astrophotographer, Brent, in order to help model the effectiveness of the filters. A lot of the ideas in this simulation were influenced by our conversations, and Brent gave me a lot of good ideas. What I'm about to show you is an imperfect simulation, and Brent, I think, has better ways of solving this, but I think the fundamentals of this are sound. But later on, you may see a video by Brent or myself that includes a lot of the ideas that we're coming up with. But for now, let's go over the simulation. Here is a visualization of what the simulations are doing. On the x-axis is the wavelength of light pollution that travels through your objective lens. On the y-axis is the proportion of light that gets through based on the bandpass curve of the filter. What I did was simulate whether a photon, represented here as the yellow line moving downward, would pass through the filter. Once it hits the filter, it either passes through or is blocked based on the transmission curve. The chance of it being blocked is like a coin flip, but the coin is biased based on the transmission curve. If the light pollution is at 500 nanometers and the filter is an O3 filter with a peak transmission of 0.9, then the light pollution has a 90% chance of going through. On this graph, light pollution successfully getting through is represented by a yellow expanding dot. Light pollution that gets rejected is a red X with a circle around it. I simulated 1,000 photons doing this for a hypothetical 6 nanometer bandpass filter. I then counted how many photons actually got through. That's the expected light pollution noise for that filter. I then repeated this whole simulation 10,000 more times. This gave me a baseline light pollution for that filter. While I was doing the 10,000 simulations of the 6 nanometer bandwidth filter, I also simulated the 3 nanometer bandwidth filter at the same time. I took the ratio of the light pollution values to get a distribution. This shows how much light pollution we should expect for a 6 nanometer filter compared to the 3 nanometer filter. And this is the same graph, but just reversed, showing how much we should expect for the 3 nanometer filter compared to the 6 nanometer filter. It seems like we should expect 2 times the amount of light pollution in the 6 nanometer filter compared to the 3 nanometer filter, or in other words, half the light pollution for the 3 nanometer filter compared to the 6 nanometer filter. Let's visually inspect 3 objects. We'll start with the Orion Nebula. We'll compare 4 hours, so this is a combination of 5 and 2.5 minute exposures of the dual narrowband to 4 hours of H-alpha data taken with a 6 nanometer filter. Let's first take a look at H-alpha and O3 separately, and then we'll compare it to the dual narrowband filter. The subframes for all of these images were taken on the same nights, but alternating filters every 10 minutes. This right here is an auto stretch of the H-alpha filter opened up in serial. So again, this is not the filter that I'm specifically reviewing. This is just more or less a control. There is a lot of detail, as you'd expect from Orion. I think it looks really nice. There's some halos around the brighter stars. Let's just take a look and pan around to see how much detail is in here. Again, there's a lot of detail. This is just straight hydrogen alpha filter. So let's go ahead and look at oxygen 3, and here it is. There's not quite as much detail in the outer regions of the nebula. There are a little bit more gradients because of light pollution. Note that something kind of went wrong with calibrating my flat frames, and I tried Adam Block's method for correcting flats. It did help, but things are a little bit posterized more than you would expect for these O3 data. Even so, there do seem to be some gradients from side to side from light pollution, and there are some halos around the stars. Now for the big reveal. Let's look at the dual narrowband results. I'll bring it up now. And look at that. Look how nice it looks. I think it looks really good, and I don't see any really big halos around the stars. So like in HA, there's a big halo around this star. I don't see that as pronounced in this filter. It does seem like we're getting all of the HA data and a lot of the O3 data as well, which I'm sure is in here, and it looks pretty nice. If I were to guess what this filter would look like with a one-shot color camera, then in Bortle 6 skies and with about 10 hours of data, it might look something like this, and I've got this pulled up in GIMP. Of course, there are a ton of variables going on. What I did to produce this image is I took the dual narrowband data and used that basically as a luminance filter, and then used my hydrogen and oxygen filter separately as the colors themselves. And then I blended it all together. And I think it looks pretty good. Of course, there are a lot of variables going on, like differences in processing, differences in your camera and the field of view of your telescope. But qualitatively, I think that this filter looks pretty good. I am back in Serial, and let's see what around 5.5 hours of the Pac-Man data look like with a dual narrowband filter. I'll bring that up now. Okay, this is what around 5.5 hours of data look like with the Pac-Man Nebula with my monochrome camera using an auto stretch. And again, I think it looks pretty good. There's a little bit of light pollution here. It's a nice image. It has all the detail I would expect from hydrogen at least, and it's got the oxygen in there too. We'll do a more quantitative analysis of the Pac-Man in just a second. But first, let me show you what the California Nebula looks like. This is 5.5 hours of the California Nebula, framed kind of poorly. What's interesting about the California Nebula is whenever I image it, there's almost no oxygen data there. So basically, this image should show what the hydrogen alpha data should show. So let me bring up the hydrogen alpha data, and then I'll pull that up in a second. And this is the California Nebula just in HA. I think it's a little bit brighter. There's not as much light pollution that's affecting the image. So that's just maybe one thing to keep in mind, is that these dual narrowband filters, if you don't have any data coming from the oxygen emission line, you might be better off just using a hydrogen filter. Let's go back to the California for a second. I think there's still a lot of good detail here, and you're not losing that much by using it. It's a little bit less contrasty. Both of these have an auto stretch applied, and I'll compare them side by side probably right here. Now, all of these images look especially good to me, especially considering that my flats were not very well calibrated, and I really don't see any halos like on my other filters. So before we get into some more of the objective measurements, let's talk a bit about how there might be even more bias in these reviews. These quantitative analyses are meant to help make sure that my qualitative judgments are good and I'm not being biased. However, with filters, especially, there may be variation in quality among batches that are made. In general, and I'm not saying SVBONY is doing this, but sometimes a manufacturer will give reviewers a product they have tested and made sure is good, and you might not receive that kind of testing with your product that you just buy on their website. There's really nothing I can do about that. Do I think SVBONY did this here? I don't think so. My SHO filters were bought without them knowing, and they seem quite good. I'll have a video specifically about those in the future, so make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon active so you don't miss it. For these quantitative analyses, I'm going to use 3 subframes taken with my own HA and O3 filters and the SV220 filter and compare them in my SNR calculator app. I have videos on how to use it. So the subframes were taken on the same night within 30 minutes of each other, and all 3 were taken of the Pac-Man Nebula because it has a decent amount of HA and O3 signal. Unlike the Orion Nebula, it also has a background with very little nebulosity, so I can use it to estimate light pollution. So I have these results here on screen. Looking here at this first graph, the dual narrowband filter in purple outperforms both my HA and O3 filters on the Pac-Man Nebula. This is actually pretty good considering that the dual narrowband filter has to deal with light pollution around the O3 and hydrogen alpha emission lines. Going into this, I actually thought that hydrogen alpha would beat the dual narrowband filter because hydrogen alpha doesn't have to worry about the strong light pollution around 500 nanometers. It definitely seems like the claim that the bandwidth is 3 nanometers is pretty close. The calculator can also estimate the light pollution noise directly, so that's down here in these charts. The hydrogen alpha filter suffers the least from light pollution, and that's expected. It has 144 photoelectrons worth of noise. The oxygen 3 filter has the most noise with 302, but the dual narrowband filter does have less light pollution than the O3 filter. Naively, and based on the simulations, we should expect the dual narrowband filter to have half the amount of light pollution compared to the combined total of hydrogen alpha and O3. Its hydrogen alpha bandwidth is half that of the 6 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter, and its O3 bandwidth is also half that of the regular O3 filter. This calculation in the SNR app shows that we're actually getting about 59% of the noise with the dual narrowband filter. So remember this histogram I showed earlier in the video? It shows how much less light pollution we should expect when we halve the bandwidth. It says that we should basically expect the light pollution noise to be 40 to 60% of the other filters. So we are in the ballpark here. Although you could argue we're seeing a little bit more light pollution noise than we'd want, but to my stats brain, this is within the margin of error for what we should expect. So this is a pretty good result. In terms of signal, so this is the target noise. This is actually the signal from the target that we're getting over in this graph over here. We should expect a dual narrowband filter to be roughly equal to the signal of the hydrogen alpha filter and the O3 filter. HA has a signal in the sample of the sky that I sampled of about 137 photoelectrons. O3 has a signal of 58 electrons, roughly, for a total of 195 when you combine them. The narrowband filter, the dual narrowband filter, has a combined signal of 185. So that is well within the margin of error based on shot noise characteristics, I would think. It's kind of what we should expect. A little bit of variation, but almost equal. I would be comfortable using this filter even in monochrome setups on targets with sufficient hydrogen alpha and O3 signal. So Orion, the Dumbbell, the Eagle Nebula, etc. I could use it like a luminance filter and then use the specific emission line filters to capture the color data. Now, I wouldn't necessarily use it on things like the California Nebula that don't have much O3 data. If you do use it on those targets, you wouldn't be getting as much benefit in signal, but you would also be taking a hit by letting in more light pollution that is kind of near the O3 emission line. For one-shot color cameras, I think this filter should work out pretty well on almost any emission nebula. I'm going to be doing some more testing with filters over the coming few weeks. I'm going to be giving the filter away once I'm done with that. I'll have more details on how to enter the giveaway in a separate video. There is a caveat. This filter has a very narrow bandwidth. If you use this filter with a fast Newtonian or other reflector, you may have problems. Anything below f5 can be problematic. I do not think there is an SVBONY version that accounts for bandpass shift. SVBONY, if you are listening, it would be great to have filters that account for bandpass shift for different f ratios. For example, there are a lot of f4 Newtonians that don't do well with regular filters for more slower telescopes, but they also don't do well with fast filters for things like a hyperstar. Is there a way to create filters for f4 scopes, as well as f2.9 scopes like newer hyperbolic Newtonians, as well as even faster telescopes like hyperstar setups? That would be really cool. I'm sure NAS would appreciate it too, especially a filter for an f4 Newtonian. So is this filter good? Yes. Is it a great price? It seems like it is to me. Is there anything that I missed? Are my thoughts good? Do I have any biases in this review that I need to correct? Let me know respectfully in the comments if I did miss something. Consider supporting my work on Buy Me a Coffee or becoming a channel member too. If you're interested in finding the right filter for your setup, take a look at my bandpass shift calculator video to help you figure that out. Or if you're interested in how I might be biased in this review without even realizing it, check out my other video about bias and review videos. Thanks for watching.